morning, everyone. We'll call this meeting to order. Roll call. John Villarreal, present. Fred Dickey.
Present.
Arturo Dominguez.
Here.
Dr. Rodney Rodriguez.
Present.
Julian Rapnowski.
Present.
Rafael Dueñas. Alma Acevedo. Mirna Hernandez. Joe Maldonado. We have a quorum now. Discussions now. We're going to start the interview process of three candidates. Ms. Bermudez is going to take about 26 minutes to ask 13 questions, and we will open up to the EDAC committee. I guess we'll go from right to left as far as questions. Each one of us can ask one question, and then we'll go back around. And the next time we can start from left to right. So with that, we can start the interview process with the first applicant.
Okay.
By the way, you do have the questions are going to be asked by Ms. Bermudez.
Hello?
Morning.
Hello, good morning. Hello, Mr. Mockman, how are you?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning. Morning.
Okay, so I'm going to get a call from you now, I suppose.
Yes, sir.
Call cannot be completed as stop.
Morning.
Everybody, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay.
Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I think so. I'm on the more in just now, just a moment. You can see me okay?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So,
Okay, very well.
my name is Melina Bermudez. I am the Human Resources Director for the City of Laredo. So we want to thank you, first of all, for taking the time to meet with us today. Just to give you an idea of how the process is going to work today, I will have about 20 to 25 minutes, and the questions will be led by myself. After that portion, the Economic Development Advisory Committee will be leading and have individual questions for you. And so during that section, they will be asking you questions directly. It's possible that they ask you to revisit some of the answers that you provided during the questions that you provided when I was leading them. At the end of it, of course, there will be some time for you to ask any questions or anything that you need or you feel you need to clarify. As you might expect, there is, of course, a time constraint. So we're hoping to get concise answers. And if there is any time for elaboration, we will definitely let you know.
Okay, very well.
Okay.
It is a little quiet on this side, so much so that I'm putting it close to my ear, even with it on speaker. It helps to hear. So please forgive me the phone on the ear like this, okay?
That's okay.
That's right.
Okay, very well.
Okay. So can you tell us a bit about your work background and then give us a description of how you think it relates to our current opening?
Okay, so the question is, describe quickly my background as it relates to the position. I hope you've all had a chance to take a look at the resume I sent you, and maybe even look at the website that kind of like looks at the different projects I've done in different parts of the world as it might relate to this opportunity in Laredo. Broadly speaking, I've worked on many different projects, starting first with about 7 years of experience in the investment industry in Northern California. I translated that after a graduate degree in economic development into international development work. My projects focus broadly in three categories. Empowerment services, focused on marginal communities and marginal populations within communities in different emerging markets. Usually the programming is at the national level. I also have an impact investment focus with an orientation to improve company access to blended finance offers, tying in government support in the form of grants with financial institution support from banks and investment support from the private investment community. In developing markets where I feature, they don't have a secondary market to speak of, so we have to develop first a primary market in private investment in order to cultivate the development of a formal stock market. And then last, developing the capacity of small companies. So I've set up different matching grant programs or I've evaluated them to improve their operations and effectiveness. In supporting these, I'm always cognizant of the economic development strategy for the country where I'm deploying these programs. So where I've introduced them is in Qatar and Pakistan. Where I've improved them or proposed them, they've been in Azerbaijan, Armenia, South Africa, and to some extent even Kuwait. I've also been the head of the National Business Incubation Association, which is noteworthy in this particular context because new business creation featured front and center in this whole undertaking. Business incubation is a catalyst for creating jobs, creating industry, and creating growth at the community level. So heading up that trade association, I became quite familiar with that tool from an economic development perspective. Also, I should put in a plug for place-based development, not just incubation programs, but science parks and industrial parks that feature often in my programming. So I've tried to curate a set of experiences that give me as broad a perspective as possible on how to do economic development, from understanding how universities can feature to government, to how private investors can be unlocked with grant programs, to tying in different kinds of university infrastructure to make it a more comprehensive solution. And at the end of the day, it's about developing strong clusters, and I think my experience probably reflects that pretty well. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Very well, thank you, sir.
Okay, very good.
What do you know about Laredo and the major local businesses involved in sustainable business practices?
Well, can I ask, you said regarding Laredo, what do I know about Laredo and sustainable business practices in Laredo?
Yes.
Okay, I've read through the master plan. It's a comprehensive document, and I've studied some parts more than other parts. But sustainability has to do with making sure that the government is creating a private sector-driven approach, led by the private sector, and public-private partnerships feature a lot in how you conceive the most sustainable approaches. So it's about creating markets. You got to improve a company's access to partnerships with other companies within their cluster. You encourage access to new capacity, access to finance, access to markets, access to skilled workforce. And in the plan, I see that, in turn, you're kind of focusing on each of them as catalytic opportunities to improve the economy. And then more specifically, when I see the sectors that have maybe the greatest growth prospects according to the master plan, in my experience, I'm very pragmatic and practical about targeting the low-hanging fruits first. So if trade advantages are clearly a strength of the cities, then that would be a place that I'd want to put attention. I'd want to look at how you can unlock, free trade zones, or how you can look at developing a whole cluster of support around a collaborative, larger project. So these are the kinds of things that I would think about. I see healthcare, tourism and retail, education and business services feature largely too. So I have interned up with each of them in one way or another in different countries, in different settings.
Okay. What was your achievement, what was your greatest achievement in your last or current position?
My current achievement, well, I think that the one I'm most proud of was in Pakistan, where I created 3,000 jobs. So that matching grant fund was a $7.5 million fund in US dollars in Pakistan, which in local terms is a multiple of that. You could conservatively double that value, more appropriately, maybe quadruple it to equate to what it might feel like to have so much funding to put into that kind of a subsidy program in Laredo. 3,000 jobs was an accomplishment that exceeded anything else that I've done so far. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Tell us about a career goal that you have accomplished and why that was important to you. What was my biggest achievement and why was it important to me? Well, I come from a very large Catholic family in Illinois, and my father had 11 siblings. I have 36 cousins, first cousins. Only 4 of us out of those 36, and none of my aunts and uncles had achieved college degrees. I achieved a college degree. I then went on to get an international master's degree. I'm the only one in my large family that has a master's education. I know how to get out of poverty better than most. I can talk aspiration. I can articulate from a personal perspective the importance of aspiration and focus and perseverance. So I've embodied that in my communications with different stakeholders in the countries I work in. Okay. Tell us about a time when you used economic development data to support a successful project.
Every single time I go into a country, I'm dropped in almost like by helicopter, and I have got to become conversational about the opportunity. It's only a few weeks, so I can begin to talk to ministers at the national level about why they need to undertake an activity, whether it's introducing a private equity fund in Azerbaijan to feature oil and gas less because it affected that country's decline in 2015 so severely, or in Kuwait or in Qatar, or conversely, now in Kenya, they've discovered oil and gas. So in identifying in Kenya, for example, now, the opportunity to develop an oil and gas cluster to support the nascent gas industry, I know that there needs to be some appetite. The companies need to see the economic benefit to them individually. So that's going to mean I'm going to have to say $6 billion of funding is going to go into Kenya oil and gas sector over the upcoming years. And I need to sit with each and every one of those companies and look at the actual part-by-part requirements to build out a successful pipeline and extraction and processing facility in the country. So I will sit with every single company. I will workshop with them, looking at their company as it is today, what their competitive advantages in terms of production, and how a part of that can be harnessed to support the new industry, or what new capacity can be built out with investment to make it the new product set more compelling for the individual companies. So whether I'm talking with stakeholders at the firm level, the community level, or at the national level, I have to translate the statistics accordingly, and it's got to be fact-based, it's data-driven approach to policy development. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you. What have you done in your previous positions at other companies that made a significant difference to the business and for which you believe you will be remembered?
I created a franchise, a social franchise in China, Bangladesh, and India for a nonprofit organization that was operating across those three countries. The nonprofit was based in Vermont. They had created interest by corporate America to create more viable, sustainable supply chains across Asia. And there was a systematic problem that quality management systems and the environment, health, and safety level and adherence to international standards was poor, if existent at all. So they had developed funding from the likes of Apple and Pfizer. I managed those relationships and developed those relationships. But more important, I needed to network these independently funded entities so they could work more effectively together. So one of the primary objectives we had was for me to create some method to network and franchise these discreetly set up entities into something that was more collective. That way, I could talk to Apple and Walmart and The Gap and other large corporate buyers and help them understand the value proposition of the network as a whole, because their supply chains were spread across the entire continent of Asia. You know, so I felt like that was a great accomplishment for which I will be remembered, and I'm particularly happy about it because it had such a large network benefit. I'm not sure how relevant it is to this particular setup for Laredo, but I think that it does speak to my confidence dealing with remote operations. You know, so for this case with Laredo, I might have in Nuevo Laredo a relationship where I'm cultivating and cross-programming and complementing, and that may speak to my ability to cultivate that kind of bilateral development opportunity.
Describe a time when you needed to use the principles of logic to solve a problem.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. Describe a time when you needed to use the principles of logic to solve a problem.
The principle of modest to solve a problem?
Logic.
Modest.
Logic.
Yeah.
Spell it.
Logic.
I'm sorry, I'm still not sure if I'm completely understanding. There's a lot of background noise. I think it's the echo in the chamber, actually.
It probably is. Can you hear me a little bit better now?
Yeah, let's try it one more time.
Okay, so describe a time when you needed to use the principles of logic, Logic, to solve a problem.
The principle of logic to solve a problem. I smile because it's something that I have to do, you know, everywhere I go. I mean, because I have to depend on culture. I can't depend on culture to inform. I can't depend upon firsthand experience. If I go into a market that I'm unfamiliar with, I have got to look at secondary research. I've got to talk to different people. I have got to deduce and understand from what I can glean, from what I can see, and that informs the recommendations that I make to either improve, just design, or even to implement an economic development program or strategy. So I have got to employ logic. It's a strength of mine, I suppose. I'm a very logical guy. I'm very sequential in my thinking. And if I have to cite one particular example of it, I might say, for example, developing a national youth policy for the country Kuwait. You know, herein I come into a country that I know nothing about. The entire national government, in one way or another, supports youth development. I know that they're going to regard this new Ministry of Youth Affairs to be an interloper and somebody that could steal budget from them. So I have got to explain and persuade each and every one of those ministries how it's beneficial to organize and harmonize across an entire national government to support a collective win. It's no easy feat. but all I have to depend upon is logic.
Thank you. Tell me about a time when you identified a need for a new approach or product to meet a market need.
To identify a new approach or a new product that became successful. Yeah, I can. When I set up my company, Anacap Venture Partners in South Africa, and I did so with the aim to create deal flow for the private equity community to invest in small and medium-sized businesses that hadn't yet received that kind of funding support. I had to look at how could I tie in as much of the other people's money I could possibly do in order to make those private investments most successful and most welcomed by the private community. And then in looking at the government, in looking at the more than 170 matching grant or in-kind support programs that were available within that national context, I saw a need to harmonize all of that. And if I could also help to ensure demand for the products and services for the companies that we were selecting to work with, it will be an even better win. Signing the corporate purchases was an essential part of an overall comprehensive economic development program. I called it Aspire, by the way. So I received, over the years that followed, $2 million worth of funding to help clarify what that value proposition was. We had the European Commission fund a feasibility assessment of that model for Pakistan. And then after that, the government of Qatar implemented the preferential procurement program for the country. So I think it reflects multiple things. It reflects perseverance, a long view. It reflects the need to harmonize multiple stakeholders for collective wins at the firm level. But it's harmonizing the need for improving access to supply and improving access to demand. Does that fit the question?
It does, thank you. Have you ever faced a significant ethical challenge or a conflict of interest at work, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, I suppose that when you're allocating national resources, there's always the vulnerability that you're going to be approached by people that expect great preference. You know, whether I'm in Pakistan or I'm issuing grants, or if I'm in Qatar and I'm issuing grants, I have to be clear, and I am clear about where my friendship ends and my business and perfection has to prevail. My father was a police officer, and he was more than a police officer; he was a chief of police. Actually, the deputy sheriff for the county I was born and raised in, and I was steeped in matters relating to ethics for my entire childhood, and I find that it has played out in my work abroad.
Thank you. Describe a time when you had to make a very important and difficult decision that affected everyone in your department.
The time I had to take a very important and difficult decision, I think that a good example of that was when I was based in China, and I was overseeing that network of compliance training centers in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, or in China. We had a major funder leave the organization. It effectively cut what was a $3.5 million budget down to $1.5 million. The practical consequence of that would be that we would have to either lay off the majority of all of my employees in China, or I could leave and save those jobs. And I elected to take the hit instead of cost all of the employees in China their job. That meant 10 people saved their jobs for my having departed. They kept them for another 12 months, I should point out. So I sometimes need to take that kind of a hard call.
So you've been approached with a new idea for your department. Describe how you go about determining the feasibility and possible success of that idea.
Make sure I understand. So, in arguing for a new departmental offering, what means do I take to ensure that the recommendation is going to be most successfully understood by management or by a board of governors? Is that right?
Yes.
Because I've reported to so many different boards, and because I've been the team leader and managed the client relationship on behalf of the consulting companies that I represent, I'm always in a position where I'm having to argue and defend for a position, recommendation. So in this case, I might draw attention to how I might construct that argument. I won't walk into a meeting with only a single position. I will walk in with a couple of options to consider. And even if I walk in with an idea that this is that one thing that I want to be walking away with as a win for those governors, I may still need to respect the options and be as articulate as I can be for them. Even if I don't want those relative to the line, I do in fact want. Another part of that is I have to have the proper rapport with the decision makers. So what I've learned in the years of working with different boards of directors is that I have got to invest in the board. I have got to understand who they are individually and what drives them, even personally. And where I haven't done so, it has hurt. It has not worked. When I do, it's a lot more effective. So in this particular case, it means maybe the city council, now becomes an important audience and a peer review committee that I have got to cultivate a strong relationship with. So that's a priority for me now.
Okay. Describe what you see as your strengths related to this job or position, and describe what you see as your areas of development related to this job or position.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one last time?
Sure. Describe your strengths and areas of development related to this particular position.
I'll describe my strength as it might be beneficial for this particular position, yeah?
Yes.
And the areas of development.
Okay. So let me try this, and if I can expand to improve the answer, I'm happy to do so. I would say that I'm a people person. I'm analytical, I'm logical, I'm articulate, but first and foremost, I care about the people I talk to. So if I can invest in that rapport, it makes everything else easier. So I'm widely regarded by the teams that I've led to be a nice guy. I've had some people say I'm their favorite employer and manager. That's more true in different countries, perhaps, than it might be in the States. In other cultures, they might bristle at the prospect of working for a Chinese employer, for example, and for the first time they've worked with an American company and an American boss, and they find that to have qualities that are maybe mystical compared to what they might otherwise have in China by itself. But I do try to walk into every relationship to develop a personal rapport with people.
Okay. Would you be able to describe your areas of development?
So this is where I can ask some questions.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, please
Yes.
ask one more time.
Sure. Now that you've just given us your areas of strength, would you be able to give us some areas of development or areas of opportunity?
Yeah, sure. I'm 53 years old now. I should tell you. And over the years, I've learned that I have a natural attention to detail that, if not checked, can go into the realm of it can become more obsessive than I want it to be. So let me explain an example of that. When I was working in the finance industry, in the asset management industry, when I was working in investment banking, I found myself behind a computer, and my presentations are relatively beautiful. I put a lot of thought into the graphical presentation of information. And sometimes, especially early in my career, I could overweight how much time I put into making sure something was pretty than practical. So my ongoing effort is to make sure that I'm balancing pragmatism with effective, clear, simple information. So I would say that is one of those things that I always keep an eye on, to not become overly attentive to details.
Okay.
I find myself succeeding when I can stay 30,000 feet. That's where my sweet spot's at, and communicating at that level.
Okay. How will your work performance enhance the City of Laredo and economic development initiatives as it is today?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one last time?
Sure. How will your work performance enhance the City of Laredo and economic development initiatives as it is today?
What kind of economic development initiatives might I anticipate for the City of Laredo as it is today, based on what I've seen in the master plan? Have I caught that right?
Yes.
What I normally look at is the clusters that have the greatest immediate return potential. There is a certain need to establish quick wins and to demonstrate to shareholders and stakeholders that it's possible to transform. So I try to think in terms of near-term and longer-term strategies that complement one another. In this particular case, I would look at the clusters that we've identified, like healthcare, trade, logistics, tourism, education, and business services, for example. And I look at what institutions and organizations exist within those ecosystems. I would organize around those strengths at the ecosystem level. There always needs to be one champion within an ecosystem that stands above the rest in terms of leading and kind of taking along with everybody in the coalition in that cluster. So if it were, for example, developing a kind of incubation program and let's say transport hub right there in Laredo, to develop new technologies, making use of, Wi-Fi or radio frequency ID or RFID technology. There would be a great opportunity to tie in the university, to tie in new technologists, to maybe help to deploy the technology in Nuevo Laredo, and make a bilateral initiative from the outset. I would try to tie in what assets exist within the border city alongside Laredo proper to encourage the master plans aim to integrate the city into a common framework. So I see let's say the U.S. side of Laredo to be the economic advantaged side. I see the other side of the border to have a population advantage in a collective approach. I think we're going to have more wins, and I would look to have programs that have an ecosystem that allies across both sides of the border.
Thank you. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to the committee as they have some questions for you.
Very good. Like I
Okay.
mentioned, my name is John Villarreal. I'm the chairman. Sir, thank you very much for the questions. Now we're going to have questions from the actual committee. Like I mentioned before the meeting, we're going to, each one of us can ask one question. We're going to start from right to left. So we'll start with Mr. Dominguez and ask one question, Mr. Dominguez, and Mr. Dickey, and so on.
Good morning. If Mr. Trump would have imposed a 5% tariff to Mexico, how would it affect Laredo? And how-
Nice to meet you. I'm sorry, I didn't understand if there was a question in there. Please repeat that.
If President Trump would have imposed the 5% tariff to Mexico, how would it affect our city or our nation?
I'm afraid the echo is in the way of this. I think what you said, correct me if I'm wrong, given how much time I've spent in Mexico, this is where I think I've lost you.
The tariffs
Ms.
that President
Bermudez, you might
Trump.
want to ask the question
Can
maybe.
you ask, maybe it's clear?
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, I can hear that. So is there any questions that I can ask you guys to help me understand the position better?
No, the question from Mr. Dominguez is, if President Trump would have enacted the 5% in tariffs for Mexico's products, how would that have affected the city of Laredo and or the nation? Is that okay?
Okay, thank you. Sorry about the confusion.
You're okay.
So to repeat, if the president passes a new tax to help finance the border wall, how will that affect the economy? And what is the reaction what's my reaction to that? Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm a big fan of business, and business is often concerned about tax levels. I don't know how much of the tax burden that's been proposed, the tax that's been proposed, would benefit border towns and border cities and communities. If I understood that, I might take a different position about this, but my inclination is to say I worry about how it might affect border trade. And given the prominence of the port, it seems like we want to make sure that the city's got free access to all the business that can be thrown at it by both Mexico and the United States. So I would tend to be a little concerned about that. But I don't know how much of the border tax that's been proposed would actually go back into the coffers of each and every one of these border communities for reallocation. So I need to study that.
Thank you. Given that we're the #1 land port in the nation right now, what else would you do to enhance our relationship with Mexico in spite of the difficulties there is, and further into the country?
Could you do me a favor and maybe repeat that one last time?
How could you make us, okay, how could
Thank
we
you.
take, us being the #1 land port, how could you take us to be even better?
If I heard the word invest only.
No.
If I had,
Okay, so I believe the question from Mr. Dickey was, since Laredo currently today is the #1 inland port, how would you be able to take us to that next level?
because it is now the largest inland port, and we see, 15,000 trucks cross the border each and every day, or containers. I mean, it's a substantial precedent. The opportunity would be to see what can be built upon the foundation. Okay, so what I would tend to do is I would deconstruct it this way. I would look at the 15,000 transport. I look at the businesses that were making use of the logistics services. I would look at what the gaps in services are to support the logistics trade and the trade industry. And then I would look at the points of weakness and I would try to turn them into a strength. Like, for example, perhaps I might look at warehousing facilities, and I might look at how there can be onward logistics support. I might look at different kinds of custom clearance systems to facilitate the processing, to improve, how profitable that trade is, given the concentration of that business there in Laredo. I think that this is a question of logic, just like we were talking about before. I would look at, okay, well, if this is what we've got, how can we pinpoint each one of those complementary areas that are logical in turn as you cultivate that? And then I would make it a community development approach. So then what I would do is I would look at what are the corporate structures that we've got, what university resources can we leverage, how can we work more effectively together to build upon addressing those gaps, or to leverage the amount of businesses already in the city. I mean, for example, in the application of services, given the sheer volume of people that are going in and out of the border, there's complementary business opportunities in restaurants, in retail trade. There could be technologies that haven't been considered yet. They have major growth potential for other borders across the United States and around the world. I would look to tie any new or existing incubation facility within that community to other centers of excellence around the world. And there are such things, there are best-in-class logistics incubation programs. And those would be affinities and affiliations that I would try and cultivate to make sure that we're bringing in best practice. I'm a big fan of best practice as well. So I'd look to see how other border areas done it. How can we learn from what they've got? I would look at the gap analysis between what we've got and what they have, and how can I draw inspiration and recommend that we consider approaching them on a very logical basis.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank
Mr. Rodriguez?
Good morning, Mr. Monkman. This is Dr. Rodney Rodriguez for the record. I have a question. How would you work together with other economic development entities in our community to work on a common goal to benefit the city of Laredo?
In my experience dealing with an ecosystem, the trick is to leverage and harmonize, and not to compete and step on other people's toes. Whether in government or in civil society or in the private sector, people don't like that kind of competition. It's antagonistic, and from our perspective, from a governmental perspective, it's important that we are amplifying and we are encouraging and cultivating. So a lot of what the rapport building that I would look to accomplish would be looking at, okay, who has the largest critical mass? Who has the best capacity to champion and celebrate? How can we empower them to be the most effective champion and leader for the cluster of activity, the cluster of support that's required? So usually I have to landscape all of those three domains: civil society, maybe academia, maybe the investment community and the banking community, as well as the corporate sector, to see how collectively we're harmonized in our approach. So really it's about daisy chaining and connecting dots. It's about explaining.
Thank you.
This is Julian Rotnovsky for the record. So you have mentioned that you've read the comprehensive plan, and so my question is pertaining to two parts. One, this is actually the first time the city of Laredo has ever had an official economic development director. So what would be, now knowing that you have at least reviewed the comprehensive plan, what would you do in your first 100 days if you were hired by the city of Laredo?
If this is the first economic development director, I should ask, first of all, I saw that in the job description that there would be a team that I would be leading, and I am not sure if there is in fact a team under the circumstance. Do we first of all have a team?
No.
No.
Not at this time.
There is not a team right now.
If I were to assume anything, is it safe to assume that the position comes with the possible budget to hire a team? Is that the concept behind it all? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, that
So
is
if that answers your question.
Okay, well, I would create a business plan. You should think of it from that perspective, I suppose. And so what I would do is I would make sure that I had a clear, let's say, approved and agreed vision for how we would be relevant to the other departments within the city. You know, so whether it's looking at the parks initiative or our historical town districts, or looking at traffic flow and the affordable housing crisis or the homeless problem, I would look at what kind of what areas relate to economic development activity to see if how future activities that we undertake supplement and tick boxes for other departments and city offerings. You know, so I wouldn't want to think about economic development in isolation. I'd want to look at how does it tie into and relate and leverage what other departments are already doing and leveraging those activities. For many reasons, one of which I will be a lot more effective in building stakeholder buy-in if they see how it's serving so many different purposes. So that's what I would look to do. I would landscape in my business plan all of the different touch points for economic development activity, and then I would say, based on these implied gaps, these are the kinds of priorities that I'm looking to, prioritize it first.
Thank you.
Hi, Alma Acevedo. My question for you is, what role does early childhood and K through 12 education and extracurricular activities play in economic development?
What goals or what does early childhood development and education play in economic development planning?
In your role and position for economic development, yes.
Okay, so if I have captured what the gist of your question is properly, in most of the economic development groups that I work with, you have, let's say, concentric circles of relevant activities that support economic development, and workforce development and childhood education does feature in the more comprehensive economic development activities or departments that I work in. Like, so for example, in Enterprise Qatar, we have a learning and development department that was disproportionately focused on early childhood education and high school education, and even the content of, let's say, entrepreneurship education that could be offered at secondary school to improve how high school leavers could think about employment, self-employment, instead of going to university. I see that in Laredo's case, the number of high school graduates and higher education attainment levels are lagging. So I understand the importance of the question. We have got to have more educated high school students that are aspiring to complete their education and to continue on to college, or short of that, leave to start their own companies and maybe take advantage of some of the cross-border entrepreneurial advantages that some immigrants come with. So I would absolutely look at how education could be a catalyst for economic development. It's a long view. It's an important one to have.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Ms. Hernandez, do you have a question? Okay, well, very good. I guess now, do you have questions for the committee?
For now, I'll tell you, I normally like to have the most in-depth questions in a face-to-face setting, and I think under this circumstance, it would be good for me to actually be able to do so there in Laredo, if I make it to that point, where I can actually look at and see the city. A lot of it is going to be something I can suss out and feel just from being there. But perhaps one of the most important questions I might ask is I see that from a diversity perspective, one of the things that I've read is that Laredo is one of the least diverse populations along the border, with like 95% of its population being Hispanic American. And the reason why I'm interested to ask about that is because I'm married to a Black South African woman, and I'm wondering if in your experience, would you perceive there to be any concerns I might have about being in a interracial relationship with mixed children living in Laredo?
No, absolutely not, no.
Cool.
If I may, our university we are the Texas A&M International Campus, and Myra can better answer that, but we have a very diverse faculty there and staff. Myra, go ahead.
We have faculty from all over the world, students from all over the world, and it's definitely one of those things that a lot of people have this saying that once you drink the Laredo water, you will never leave, and that's because we're so welcoming to any population, any party that wants to come live in this community, and of course, enhance it and make it even better of what we have. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I'm happy to hear that. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then a second thing I saw in the job description, and I have applied for this position a long time ago, so I can't recall if this was in the job ad I saw then or if it's just something that I noticed now, but it does indicate in the job description I must be bilingual in Spanish. I am not. However, have a formal education in Spanish. I did have it as the language in high school and in college, and if I have the opportunity, I think that there's a good chance I'll be able to make use of that education and become more conversational with time. But I feel like it's important that you know that I am not currently today bilingual. Now, I feel like it's important to mention, but on the other hand, I should also say that I have worked in, for the last 20 years, countries where English was not the first language, and I often would have to make use of translators. And I was able to do so, and I was effective. But you should keep that in mind as well.
Thank you for that. It is not a requirement. Speaking Spanish or being bilingual is not a requirement. The job profile just states an ability to.
I'm sorry, could you say that one last time?
Sure.
Is that going to be, is that okay?
Sure. The job profile doesn't state that you must be bilingual. It is just, it just states an ability to be bilingual.
Okay. Okay, very good. Very good. Also, one thing I would like to inquire about, I'm going to be leaving on Monday for a 3-week consulting assignment in Kenya. I've been working on it here for the last couple of weeks, and I hope that's not going to pose a problem with the process that we're going to be going through going forward. If it turns out, for whatever reason, that it does become important for me to meet with you all, face-to-face, if I can get a week or two's notice, I will make sure that I am back in country in order to do so. Okay?
Yes, we will do the best we can in terms of timeframes. If you do make it to the next round, there will be an in-person interview in Laredo with management.
And do you anticipate when that window is going to be? When you might anticipate those meetings to occur?
Right now, we anticipate between 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, very good. Excellent. Okay, that's the questions I have for now. And I'm going to have more questions when I meet you in person, if it works that way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
It's been my pleasure, everybody. Thank you for your time and for your consideration.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Okay, farewell. Bye-bye.
I want to take a 3-4 minute break. We've got a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Pierre, how are you? Once again,
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Melina Bermudez. I am the Human Resources Director for the City of Laredo. I just wanted to give you an idea of how today's interview will be structured. So
Okay.
I have about 13 questions that I will ask on behalf of the committee, and that will take about 22 to 26 minutes. After that time, the Economic Development Advisory Committee will then ask you individual questions that they have for you. After that time, then there will be some time for you to ask any questions that you may have.
Okay.
Okay, so then we'll go ahead and get started. Tell us a bit about your background, about your work background, and then give us a description of how you think it relates to our current opening.
Okay. The question is, what is in my background that I think would, I'm paraphrasing what you said. I just wanted to make sure I got it clearly. What is in my background that I think would make me a successful candidate, right?
That is right.
Okay. Well, I've had about close to 20 years in economic development. I have worked at the state, the county, the municipal level, and the private sector. It's something that I'm very passionate about, economic development. I believe that whereas the state and the federal government can enact policies to affect economic development, it's really at the local level that the rubber meets the road. And I think that's where we could really affect people's quality of life. And this is what we're really trying to do in economic development, improve the quality of life for people. And I have done it well in the past, and I think I can do it again. I have the technical, the technical academic training in economic development, as well as that was my specialty area in grad school, as well as the practical experience. When I got out of grad school, I thought I was a hotshot economic development, but I realized that it was the practice, it was the building of relationships with the members of the community, with the stakeholders, that really makes you a successful economic development person. And I think I did that very well. And again, in my background, I always say that I am a man of at least average intelligence, and I do much more than average work. I believe in the old Thomas Edison dictum that success is 95% perspiration and 5% inspiration. So I work hard at what I do, so I think I can succeed just about anywhere I go to do economic development.
What do you know about Laredo and the major local businesses involved in sustainable business practices?
The first part of the question was, what do I know about Laredo? What was the second part? I'm sorry.
So what do you know about Laredo and the major local businesses involved in sustainable business practices?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the second part again?
Sure. What do you know about the major local businesses that are involved in sustainable business practices?
Okay. I am, actually, I have been to Laredo once. When I was in grad school, I had a girlfriend who was doing some research on maquiladora. So she was actually from the McAllen area. And so I came down here to visit her, and we did some driving around the maquiladoras. We went across the border from McAllen into Reynosa and further down into Tamaulipas in Mexico. Then we drove up to Laredo and went across to Nuevo Laredo and Nuevo Leon. So I've been there, but that doesn't mean I don't know the city inside out as I know Miami. But the big economic driver I know in Laredo is the international trade. You know, it's one of the. I've been doing some research on Laredo after I applied for the position, and it is one of the busiest crossing points between the U.S. and Mexico. So, and I also read the economic development element of the city's comprehensive plan. So it gave me some good ideas as to what the driving forces in economics are in Laredo. As I said, it is international trade. One of the, I guess I can say the surprises is that even though you have it is probably the biggest, or perhaps the busiest crossing point, I did not see a whole lot of what I call the supporting industries. I thought that one area would be the financing and banking and lawyer services related to the support of that international trade. I didn't see much of that in the comprehensive plan in the economic development. I don't know if I missed it, but so that in my view is one of the areas that could be expanded.
Okay. What was your greatest achievement in your last or current position?
My greatest achievement, I think I had a few achievements in a similar job. I worked for Alachua County, which the county seat is in Gainesville, Florida. And it was, as a matter of fact, when I looked at the job description in Laredo, it kind of reminded me of Alachua County, that there was no one doing economic development except a private nonprofit entity. And so when I got there in Gainesville, I had to I had to create the economic development infrastructure from the ground up, since they didn't have one. And I think that was a great achievement in the sense that it was a divided community. What happened was, Alachua County is a very ecologically sensitive area. To the north of the county, you have the aquifer recharge area. To the south, you have the swamps. To the east, you have the caves. And the caves are very important as an eco-tourist activity. People come from all over the world to go dive in these caves and engage in ecotourism. So there was a division there. And my task was to bring the companies, the participants together. And I think I did that very well, because before we could move on any economic development, we had to have a sort of meeting of the mind. And I created what I call the Sustainable Economic Development Plan. It involved engaging all of these stakeholders. It took me nearly a year to do it. I had to engage the stakeholders. I had what I call a lot of listening tours, went out to meet with these different groups, take note of what they were saying and what their concerns was, wrote a sort of this skeleton of a plan and then we invited we hired a professional facilitator to facilitate this group, and we got a plan out of it. So that was one, but that seems kind of like a sort of academic. It's just a plan. It's no measurable outcome. Another, which is more practical, another success that I had was I had a company that wanted to leave the county because they were bought over by a Canadian company. And at that time, I did not have any money, to provide them with any kind of incentive. But I figured I would have to get them to stay. So I already had a good relationship with most of the key stakeholders, the university, the community college, the Chamber of Commerce, and everybody. So we got together and we had a series of a series of meetings. And, I put the meeting at the economic development plan, I put the meetings together. And we came up with a strategy. We approached the company and we made a certain proposals to them. What happened was, this is a company that manufactured sporting equipment, bows and arrow and that sort of thing. And the company that took them over manufactured sporting equipment clothing, things like camouflage outfits and those sort of things. And they wanted to move to Canada. So our task was to convince them to stay where they were and bring in the activities, the other activities, into Alachua County, the manufacturer of the sporting outfit. And so what we did was we made them certain proposals. In that proposal was the workforce board and the community college would come together to customize the training for them, for the new employees. The university material science department would help them with developing their bows, make it lighter and stronger. The regional utility, the electricity company, would give them a 10% break on the electricity for 5 years. Our Visitors and Convention Bureau would allow them to advertise on billboards. See, billboards were outlawed in the county, but those that were there were grandfathered in. So that was a big deal. Advertising on the billboard was a big deal. And the public works was supposed to resurface the road leading to the facility, but they brought it forward. And we came together and did that and offered it to them, and they stayed. And they created over 200 new jobs at the existing plant they had, with the merger of the two companies. So I like that because it didn't really cost us a whole lot of money because I didn't have any money at the time. But I think it really went to show what can happen when you have the key stakeholders on the same page. And I think that was a big success for me.
Thank you. Tell us about a career goal that you have accomplished and why that was important to you.
I'm sorry, I lost you there.
Tell us about a career goal that you have accomplished and why that was important to you.
Okay, career goal, yeah. As I said, economic development is my passion, and I was able to move on to do more responsible tasks in economic development. I moved from Alachua County. I went on to be the CRA director for the city of Allendale Beach, and that was important to my goal is always to use my skill to improve a community. That is my goal. I try to improve myself in that I keep abreast of the best practices. And, I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always attending workshops and trying to improve my skill and my capabilities. And I always try to improve the community that I live in. And that has been my goal. That's really what drives me. These are my goals, and I think I've achieved them.
Okay. Tell us about a time when you used economic environment data to support a successful project.
Ooh. I'm sorry, there was some sort of crackling sound. I didn't quite hear this one.
That's okay. Tell us about a time when you used economic environment data to show a success or to support a successful project.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat again. I don't know why something is coming in over your voice, and I can.
Tell us about a time when you used economic environment data to support a successful project.
Okay, economic development data, right? When I was in Gainesville, we were trying to develop the east side of the county, which is a predominantly minority and poor side of the county. And try as we may, we could not get any activity going on the east side. I tried to get a grocery store to move over there, and I showed them the data. Grocery stores usually make decisions based on house tops, you know, the number of people, and is usually a key indicator of where grocery store would locate. And for some reason, I couldn't get anything going on the east side. And that was part of our long-range economic development plan, to get some economic activity on the east side. But I was talking to a planner at the university one day, and he was telling me that the university was becoming too crowded. And so they needed to move some activity from the campus to some, off campus. So I told him, I suggested to him that they move the activity from campus to the east side, because there was some activity that didn't have to be on campus. And I told him, I suggested to him that if they were to do so, they're going to help improve the east side a lot. And sure enough, he talked to the higher ups, and we met and we discussed it. And they decided first to move fleet management, because that didn't have to be on campus. And that was, they moved fleet management, and later on they moved human resources off campus over to the east side. And what that did was it increased the amount of traffic on the east side. And even though the data had suggested that the east side could grow, that there was there was the potential, no one was taking the chance, no developer was taking the chance to start building on the east side. And sure enough, when the university moved its fleet management and its human resources over the east side, the activity on the east side just took off, because the underlying data was there. In fact, just before I left the county, Walmart broke ground on a super center. And Walmart, I'm sure you know, does not do anything by guess. They do the demographic analysis very well. So when they decided to move to the east side and started to break ground there, it sort of proved my point that the east side had the potential. All that it needed was that little impetus for somebody to take the first step. We had all of the data in terms of the amount of people, the per capita income, and everything that we were advertising to developers. But they didn't move until the University of Florida took that first move, and then Walmart moved over there.
What have you done in your previous positions at other companies that made a significant difference to the business and for which you believe you will be remembered?
I'm sorry, I have to ask you to repeat again. I don't know if you're too far or too close, but somehow the sound is kind of cracking up. It's not coming in clear.
That's okay. What have you done in your previous positions at other companies that made a significant difference to the business and for which you believe you will be remembered?
Okay. What have I done in a previous job situation, I think, is the question, right? Essential.
Yes.
Okay. To look at one of my, I tend to look at human capabilities in judging an economy and how it moves forward. I tend to look at people's ability. To me, one of the keys to economic development is not so much the amount of incentives we give companies and so, but what are the skills of the local people? What skills? You see, companies can locate just about anywhere. You know, given the amount of the improvements in communication and transportation that we have nowadays. In fact, I was looking at the website of the Laredo Economic Development Corporation, and they have a statement that says, geography is our destiny. And I thought about it and I said, yes, geography is our destiny to a certain extent, but in a way, geography is becoming history. It's becoming less important where you are. Of course, if you're on the border, you can't move the border up further north. But the point I'm making is, I believe a lot in improving people's capabilities, and business tend to gravitate where there are skilled workers, and the skilled workers tend to gravitate to places where they think the quality of life is best. So one of the things that I've done was to launch a program to improve the skill of the workforce in Alachua County. I worked with the community college, the businesses, the state of Florida, and what I did was I looked at the jobs that were being created, and I tried to match the skill of the workers with the needs of the businesses. And I think that was one of the really big deals, one of the things that policies that I created that survived me in Alachua County after I left it, because they still do it, and it has turned out to be very important. Because Alachua County is mostly a university community. The University of Florida and the hospitals are big drivers of employment there, and they need a constant and steady stream of skilled employees. And see, the tendency of the people in government is to always say, we need to create more jobs. And I say, and my response is, yes, we always try to create more jobs, but we don't just want to create jobs. We want to create jobs that match the community. And so you have to keep improving the human capabilities, improving the skills of the workers in the area. And I think that was one of my great contributions to the area.
Thank you. Describe a time when you needed to use the principles of logic to solve a problem.
The principles of, I'm sorry.
Logic. L-O-G-I-C.
Oh, logic, okay. Using the logic models, that's what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we have it. I work with the Visitors and Convention Bureau, and we develop models of the amount of people coming in and where they spent the money and how much, and so we developed this model as to how much we should contribute to the Visitors and Convention Bureau also had a source of funding, but there were other groups within the Visitors and Convention Bureau, like the arts community, who said, well, we need some money. The film commission, we need some money. So we developed this models to say, well, how much are they contributed. So how much should we give them based on how much they communicated? And the logic model is sort of a step-by-step analysis, at least that's the way I use it, of how a step-by-step analysis of the process that we use to develop this, to determine how much money we should give the various entities, what role they were playing in the greater economic development process, particularly within the Visitors and Convention Bureau.
Tell me about a time when you identified a need for a new approach or product to meet a market need.
I'm sorry, a new product?
When you identified a new or a need for a new approach or product to meet a market need.
Oh, boy. Now, I'm sorry, I'd have to ask you to repeat. I heard you say a new product, but a new product and...
Tell me about a time when you identified a need for a new approach or product to meet a market need.
A new approach to a new product to meet a market need. I think I can come up with a new approach. As I said, when I went to Alachua County, there was no one doing economic development from the government side. It was just a branch of the Chamber of Commerce doing economic development, similarly to the Laredo Economic Development Corporation. And what happened was, in fact, what sort of intensified the controversy was that they recruited a business that was a distribution center. And people were very annoyed about it. For one thing, the distribution center was located right on the edge of the county, next to the neighboring county. And most of the workers came from the neighboring county and not from Alachua County. And people argue that a distribution center did not match a university community. They say, we are a university community. We should be trying to create jobs that would use the talents and skill of the university. And a distribution center would not do that. Not that they were being elitist and didn't want a distribution center, but if the county wanted to do a distribution center, it should put it where the low-income people, low-skilled workers are, and have more access to it. So instead, as I said, they located it on the north side of the county, where most of the workers who came to that facility came from outside of the county. So what I did was to avoid all of these controversies. I created an Economic Development Advisory Committee. It comprised of a cross-section of the stakeholders. And there were 12 members. And their job was to review any request for economic incentive from the county and make a recommendation. When I created it, many people said, well, you're adding another layer of bureaucracy, and it's going to slow the process down. But it did it. As a matter of fact, it sped up the process. What happened was when businesses came to and made a presentation to the Economic Development Advisory Committee, if the committee made a positive recommendation, it sailed through the county commission. And it was a very democratic process in the sense that, the Economic Development Advisory Committee was very representative of the community. And when they heard a presentation, many of the members of the committee were people who had experience in economic development and business in some way or the other. And once they made a recommendation, the commission accepted that recommendation, and it sped things up, and it avoided this kind of businesses that did not match the community.
Have you ever faced a significant ethical challenge or a conflict of interest at work, and how did you handle it?
And that was ethical challenge, right?
Right.
Okay. Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, that's why I left my job at the city of Hallandale Beach. I used to be the CRA director, and Florida law clearly prescribes what we can use CRA TIF, tax increments financing, for. And I had a disagreement with the city manager over the use of funding. And he was saying that his argument was, you need to take a chance. To quote him, in order to make an omelet, you have to break an egg. And so I need to take a chance and move on. But I told him that the laws were very clear and very specific as to what we could and cannot use TIF funding for. And we disagreed over it. And this, in essence, is why I left there. I resigned from the Electoral County Commission. And my philosophy is, if I could disagree with the rest of my team, my supervisors, and I could still go along with something that I disagree with. But when it comes to anything ethical or legal, I would resign. If I think, I can't go along with it, I would resign, and that's what I did.
Okay. Describe a time when you had to make a very important and difficult decision that affected everyone in your department.
I missed that one. Could you repeat, please?
Sure. Describe a time when you had to make a very important and difficult decision that affected everyone in your department.
An ethical decision that touches everyone in my department, right?
A difficult decision.
A difficult, no, I can't, apart from having to make that decision to resign over the use of TIF funds, I never had to make any other difficult ethical decisions. What I do is when I have to do anything that would put county's funds at risk, I check very closely with the lawyers and I get good legal advice. So I don't do anything that would, seem unethical or illegal. I am overly cautious in that respect, in the use of public funds.
Okay.
Did I answer your question as I interpreted it?
In part, is there a time when you had to make a difficult decision that affected other people on your team or in your department?
Okay. No, whenever I have to make decisions that sort of changes policy, I consult with my teammates. I don't, for instance, let me give you an example. We had a policy in the city of Hallandale Beach when I was the CRA director of when people applied for housing assistance. If someone applied for a down payment in a house, for instance, we would, review it and give them the down payment. But after they sold the property, they had to pay us back. And it didn't matter if they sold the property 10, 15 years later. So I said, oh no, that is not a good idea because it prevents people from moving. And sometimes people do have to move. They have to sell the property to move to better job, better circumstances, and so on. So what I said, look, I did a sliding scale. If you keep the property for 5 years, you pay us a certain amount. If you keep it for like 15 or so years, you don't pay us anything. And I told my members of the team, I had a CRA team, you know, I had housing specialists and housing managers. And this is the old policy they knew. They knew the policy of if you sell the house, if the homeowner sells the house, he paid us back a certain amount. But I discussed it with them and I said this was not a good policy. It was too rigid. We need to give the people more flexibility. And they went along with it. I start from the position that good ideas are scarce and they're randomly distributed among any population. So you have to engage people to get their ideas and their feedback and everything. And that's how I go about making decisions. I don't make decisions just on my own, thinking that I'm the smartest man, you know, and I could go about and make a decision and everybody would go along. I engage them to see what their response would be.
Okay. So, Mr. Pierre, we have a limited amount of time, and we have quite a few questions left. So if you would provide concise answers to the following questions, we would very much appreciate it. That way we can get all the great information you're providing us.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say you've been approached with a new idea for your department. Describe how you would go about determining the feasibility and possible success of that idea.
How I would go about testing the feasibility of what idea?
Of a new idea.
Of a new idea, okay. Well, I have to put the new idea in context. And I'm very data-oriented. Now, I have a background in economics and statistics, so if someone comes up with a new idea, they have to show me, well, why, or even if I come up with the idea, I have to look to see, do some sort of a cost-benefit analysis in my head or on paper to see what it would cost, what the benefits would be, and just as important, who would benefit and who would tend to support or oppose such an idea. So I realize that economic analysis is not the only input into decision making. You know, those projects affect people. So we got to see who would benefit, who would lose, and how they would respond to it. And again, is it viable? Politically, economically, and otherwise.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Describe what you see as your strengths and your areas of opportunity related to this position.
I think my strength is, as I said, I have a good understanding of economic development. I have learned over the years that it's not just the technical understanding, but the ability to build relationships. That's what it's all about. I mean, I always say that economic development touches just about every aspect of local government life. So it requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. So I have to get input and communicate with just about every segment of the community. And I have done that well. I've been able to build those kinds of relationships. And I think that's one of my great strengths.
Can you tell us what you would see as your area of opportunity?
I'm sorry, go ahead. Repeat again, please.
Can you tell us what you see as your area of development or opportunity?
The area of development?
Yes. So as we just spoke about your strengths, can you provide us an area of opportunity or development?
For my development, development, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I always consider myself a work in progress. And I'm always looking for areas to develop more skills. One of the things I'm working on is data analysis, big data analysis. When I was a graduate student, we used mostly econometric models. Now the models have developed and become more sophisticated, and they do big data analysis so we could gather data and identify problems and try to bring solutions to the problem. And that's what I'm working on now. I'm also working on a book here I'm also reading a book now called Strategic Doing, which is a complement to strategic planning. See, in the past, we used to write a lot of plans, strategic plans, and we always had problems. And I say we, I mean people in the economic development community. We sometimes had problems implementing them because the government, most of those plans have to be implemented by private individuals, and the government really doesn't have any control over what the private individual does. So you have to find a way to get private individuals and government to work together on specific projects in their mutual interest. And that's what I'm working on now. That's an area I'm trying to improve.
Thank you. How will your work performance enhance the city of Laredo in economic development initiatives as it is today?
How could my work performance enhance the city of excuse me. I'm sorry, say that again?
Yes. How will your work performance enhance the city of Laredo in economic development initiatives?
Well, I think that as overall, my ability to bring focus on a problem, to first of all, to identify a problem, and have everybody agree that this is a problem that is worth solving, and that it would contribute to the overall success of economic development. Say, for instance, one of the issues I've learned about in my research on Laredo is the relatively low level of high school graduation. And I think that's an issue because nowadays, most jobs require more than a high school education. It requires some specialized training. So if I say to some stakeholder, I think this is a problem, and we should find a way to work with the schools and all the stakeholders together to work on it. I think that's something I can get agreement on, and that's something we could work on. In other words, I identify issues that would affect the economic development of the community, and I get people to agree on it, and we work on solving it. It's one thing to just identify the problem. It's another thing to come up with a solution for it. And I'm very solution oriented. I don't just want to identify problems. Anybody can do that. And so I think that outlook and that ability to bring resources together to focus on a problem would benefit the city of Laredo, or for that matter, any city that I live in and work in.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to the committee. They have some individual questions for you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Pierre. Well, we'll start this time from the left to the right.
Hi, good morning. For the record, Maria Hernandez. Earlier you mentioned about the quality of life. Would you take a minute to describe what does quality of life mean to you?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get it.
Earlier you mentioned about quality of life being important. Can you please define what quality of life means to you?
I think you're coming in worse than the previous question. I don't know why it's not coming in clear.
She mentioned that you spoke of quality of life. Can you tell us what does quality of life mean to you?
Oh, quality of life. Okay, I'm sorry. I got you now. Well, all of the things that affect people's life. For instance, historically, economic developers used to focus a lot on jobs. Let's bring in jobs, let's recruit businesses. And that's important. But I realized that if you ask people what are the most important things to them, schools come in high on the list. Of course, jobs come in on the list. But things like parks and recreation and arts and public spaces and security, all of those things contribute to the quality of life. You know? And those things are important in attracting jobs and getting more people employed and improving their quality of life. Because I may have mentioned in passing that a lot of young people, especially, they want a job, but they also want to go to a place where the quality of where the quality of life is high. And so employers understand that. So they would tend to locate to places where the quality of life is high. And so all of those factors that I mentioned, the arts and culture, natural amenities, all of those things contribute to the quality of life. But of course, for different people, they would rank those things differently. But in general, that contributes to the overall quality of life.
Thank you.
Yes, hello, Alma Acevedo. My question is, what role or what is the importance of early childhood education and the K through 12 education when it comes to economic development?
Oh boy, that's a big one, because I teach at I've taught for many years, and I've taught at the community college level, at the college level, and at the graduate level. I've even taught prisoners who are about to be released. I taught this week. And the reason I'm saying that is my experience in the education has taught me that this is a very vitally important thing. In fact, right now, to give you some context, in the U.S. now, we have a historically low unemployment, but we still have a lot of complaints and a lot of anxiety about wage and wage gain. And a lot of that has to do, or should I say that the wage gap is very closely related to the skills gap. And that skills gap could be traced right back to the K to 12 level. If we don't get the kids early, they tend to have gaps in their education, and it becomes very difficult as they get older, to prepare them for the workforce. And we have to see K to 12 as an investment. This is one of I'm kind of passionate about that topic, so I can kind of go off on it, and I have to remember to stay on track. But it's really important. And I think most communities should see it as an investment, and they should employers, especially the big ones, could work with the employees to provide better, pre-K and in general work with the educational institutions to prepare people for the workforce. Because again, the skills that are required in the workforce today are a lot higher than they were 30, 40 years ago. So we have to, as I tell my students, if they were born, most of my students were born in the late 1990s. And so the skills that they required if they were born 200 years ago, the skills that they required were very, very much fewer. But now the skills are much more complex. And so we have to take that into consideration.
Thank you.
So my name is Julian Rutnovsky. My question pertains to the actual position. So this is the first time that the city of Laredo has had an economic development director. What would be your action plan in your first 100 days here?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of the question. What would be mine?
What would be your action plan if you were to be hired by the city of Laredo for your first 100 days?
For the first 100 days. Okay. Well, actually, my action plan for Laredo would be very much like my action plan for Alaska County, because I went into a same institution where there was no economic development person, and not only that, the county was deeply divided. So what I would do is to first get to know my internal teammates. In other words, the other departments that I would be working closely with, and figure out what has been going on. The planning and parks and recreation, public works and all of these departments, because at some point or the other they would be involved. Then I would get to know the community, the stakeholders in the community. One of the first groups I would try to establish close relationships with would be the Laredo Economic Development Corporation. What they have done, what they want to do, how I can partner with them, what role we would play. Because I believe that there is a role for private groups like the Laredo Economic Development Corporation to play, and there is also a role from someone from the government side to play. So we would be working as a team, and I have to convince the people in Gainesville that we were not in competition, but we had to work collaboratively. There are some things they could do and I couldn't do, and there were some things that I could do better than they could do. So I would work with them. I would work with the other stakeholders, the Chamber of Commerce, all of the big businesses, and of course, the educational and training institutions. Most universities have someone who is responsible for economic development and community relations. I would make sure that I know this person very well, work with them, and the same thing for the community college and Texas A&M International University. So that's essentially for my 100-day plan would be to get to know the community, what everybody is doing, what their concerns are, and I would even ask them what they would do if they were in my position. Kind of a strange question to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. So it gives me some perspective, and I would gather that information and probably write a 100-day report to the city manager to say, this is what I found, because this is what I did in Gainesville. I call it a 90-day report, the first 3 months. This is what I found. This is where I think we should move. The good thing is you already have a fairly detailed economic development plan within the city's comprehensive plan. So that gives me a kind of some guidance as to who I should collect with, the Downtown Development Authority, the historic preservation people, the arts community. All of these groups I would meet with them and try to figure out where they are and where they want to go in that 90-day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the next question.
Dr. Rodney Rodriguez, for the record, Chair, I defer my time to the next committee member. My question has been answered. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I totally missed this one.
No, I have no questions.
Mr. Dominguez?
Arturo Dominguez, for the record. Is that on? Yeah. Mr. Kendrick, good morning. Arturo Dominguez. Mine is a trade question. If President Trump would have imposed a 5% tariff to Mexico, how would it have affected our city or our nation economically?
The part of your question I get is the the tariff on Mexico, right? Is that what?
Yes,
And how it might affect the city of Laredo?
yes.
Okay,
Or the nation, I mean, or everybody.
I think that tariff would have a negative impact on the city of Laredo, a negative impact on the U.S. in general, because a lot of the, well, you know, as we know, most production among countries is very intertwined, very linked, and you have these supply chains. So if you impose a tariff on, I don't know, on something, auto parts, for instance, coming in from Mexico, that makes it more expensive when you assemble the parts, when you assemble that car in Detroit or wherever. And if the tariff continues, eventually less goods will come through the port of Laredo, especially if it increased as was proposed. So, I mean, that is a big issue, but the short answer to my question, to your question is, the tariff would be negative.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you.
At this time, we have time for maybe a couple of questions that you might have for either us or for the committee.
Well, I guess you answered that one already, because I was going to ask you, why was there no, is economic development, let me ask the question this way, is economic development done now only through the Laredo Economic Development Corporation? Because a city of that size, 260,000 people, usually have an economic development office. So what's taking place now?
This is Dr. Rodney Rodriguez. The city has different, can you hear me? Okay. The city has different economic development entities within the city, the Laredo Economic Development Corporation being one of them. The college itself, the Laredo College, has an economic development center that is streamed primarily for international trade, logistics, short-term industry certification programs. But there's other entities that support the economic development initiatives of the city, such as the Chamber of Commerce. We have Workforce Solutions for South Texas. We have organizations such as the Logistics Manufacturing Association. There's an array of different entities that work together to be able to promote economic development in the city of Laredo.
Okay. All right. So I understand you to say that there are various entities doing economic development within the city. And so now, whoever comes in as the economic development director would have to sort of bring those entities together and have them sort of singing from the same sheet of the hymnal.
That is what we're hoping for, yes.
Okay.
In my opinion. So.
I have it. How would you rate the level of collaboration among the key stakeholders in the community?
About 2 years ago, I believe it was, by initiative of the Chamber of Commerce and a private sector company, we formed, we call it the G13 for lack of a better name, but it's actually the groups that Dr. Rodriguez mentioned. It includes, it's basically every business association and the 2 higher education institutions. So it's the Laredo builders, the motor carriers, the freight forwarders, the brokers, so it's all the business associations. And we have come together as private sector and as higher education to create a more unified voice and understand the things that might not be our area of expertise. For example, I'm more affiliated with logistics and manufacturing, and so I'm having a better understanding of the issues that face the builders and when it comes to economic development. So this is a new initiative. It's we actually have a meeting this afternoon, and we are becoming more unified to work with the city and understand the city's objectives and how to better, communicate with the city how their policies affect or impact the business community, whether positive or negative. And also, we have created a form of communication to where we can understand what the city does and they can understand what we do and hopefully work towards the goals of the comprehensive plan and just, again, better quality of life and economic development. So this is something that's already been going on, but with the position, once it's filled, what we foresee is it to continue and exponentially improve.
Okay, thank you. I guess my last question is, if I were to be hired for this position, what would be the most perhaps immediate and important, I should say, project that I would be working on? Is there one project that stands out above the rest?
I think Ms. Acevedo said it. I mean, as far as collaborating with all the different organizations, the in our opinion, the LEC, the Laredo Economic Development Corporation, trying to work with them, trying to bring private business to the city. Also, looking at all the tax incentive tools that are available, TERSs, you mentioned TIFs, TRISs, municipal management corporations and things of that nature.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. These were my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pierre. A member of Human Resources will be contacting you if you are selected to move on in the process.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about myself, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Do y'all want to take like a 3-minute break real quick?
Hello, Mr. Robinson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. My name is Melina Bermudez. I am the Director of Human Resources for the City of Laredo. I just wanted to give you an overview about how this interview process is organized this morning. So there will be about 13 questions that are led by myself. I would ask that you keep your answers concise to about 2 to 2.5 minutes per question. At that time, once that section has concluded, I will turn it over to the Economic Development Advisory Committee, and they have individual questions that they will be asking you as well. After that time, there will be some time for you to ask us any questions you may have.
Okay.
Okay, so then we'll go ahead and get started. Tell us a bit about your work background, and then give us a description of how you think it relates to our current opening.
I guess my work background since 1999 has been working largely in community and economic development entities, serving as director in primarily the state of Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, York City, which is south of Harrisburg, Berks County, and a town named Carlisle currently, doing community and economic development, creating jobs for community, trying to bring in companies and have them grow and expand, and working with federal and state and local programs to keep the area solvent and take advantage of whatever's offered that can benefit the community.
Thank you. What do you know about Laredo and the major local businesses involved in sustainable business practices?
I guess my experience with Laredo thus far is that you had advertised this position a couple years ago, and I think I did participate in the interview then, and I lost track of you the last year and a half as you've been trying to put somebody in this position. But I am aware of where you're located and that you're somewhat of a border town, and you have the challenges that go with that, but also the opportunities to use that with workforce development and other things of that nature.
Can you tell me what your greatest achievement in your last or current position was?
I guess in terms of companies, trying to think outside the box, where if there's a company that wants to locate or wants incentives or doesn't want incentives because they don't want some of the strings attached, I've tried to be as creative within the bounds of the rules and the regulations to try and find ways to bring companies in or make projects work. We had a number of companies, AMP company back in the early 2000s had been bought out by another company, so a lot of their headquarters buildings in the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area were left vacant because they didn't need two headquarters. So it was good to look at ready-made sites that maybe needed updated, but at that moment in time, we were able to offer some tax incremental financing, things of that nature, that allowed new companies to come in within a short amount of time and replenish jobs that have been taken away.
Okay. Tell us about a career goal that you have accomplished and why that was important to you.
I think having to navigate sometimes the political landscape of working in cities and counties and for the state, I've enjoyed, whether it's been transitions or things where it was the end of people's terms where I could help shape the future of their organization. So mainly having brought in staff and professionalized offices, and then even as I look back, a lot of those staff are still there, and a lot of those offices have been left in a better place.
Tell us about a time when you used economic environment data to support a successful project.
I missed the first part.
Tell us about a time when you used economic environment data to support a successful project.
For most of my career, I've administered the community development block grant funds and the home program funds. So when you use those, you have to look at low to moderate income businesses or households, and also use that data for the best use of the funds, because many times you have projects that you want to fund, but they don't want to fund themselves quickly. So I think having to look at whether it's a housing project or housing development, we're looking to line up multiple sources of funding, federal, state, local levels. I know we had a shopping mall that was going to close, and it would have ended up being basically a big used car lot if it had fully closed, and we were able to line up school district, state, county, and municipal money where they could give an abatement and freeze the taxes at a certain level. So I think in terms of accomplishment, just basically knowing the sources of funding and having them line up.
What have you done in your previous positions at other companies that made a significant difference to the business and for which you believe you will be remembered?
Again, I'll have to go back to that where we had a major company get bought up. And again, I was able to use some of the funding opportunities and working with the governor's office to get funds kind of earmarked for these empty buildings, but many times, empty buildings could be a good thing when people are looking for ready-made sites. So we see that even with Amazon today, they want to know everything's in place if they're going to look at a new headquarters or a new sub-headquarters. So I think I was able, much like you, where you have multiple interstates flowing through your town. You have, almost 300,000 of population. I was able to take similar communities and take advantage of our location, our proximity to markets, and utilize what we had.
Describe a time when you needed to use the principles of logic to solve a problem.
I would just go back to having to administer the federal Community Development Block Grant, the EPA grants, environmental protection, and just having to use the logic and use the formulas and make sure you meet deadlines and make sure staff is competent to do the work. If I'm the director, I need to make sure that I'm leading the team.
Tell me about a time when you identified a need for a new approach or product to meet a market need.
I think I missed the first part of the question again, sorry.
That's okay. Tell me about a time when you identified a need for a new approach or product to meet a market need.
Yeah, I would, where I was one of my facets within my department was a nonprofit. I was a governmental employee, but I was a nonprofit segment within that. And in doing so, there was a company that was trying to sell their building for years, and there was a company that wanted to find a building for space but didn't have the money to buy the building. So we were able to get creative, and I had the company donate building to me for pretty much the asking price, which I think at the time was $700,000. So I took the building, they got the tax credits and the donation of that, and after one day, I sold it to the company that committed to have 300 jobs over 3 years for $1. So their main problem was the infrastructure to buy the building, but they had the product and the contracts to have a business plan. So that would be something outside the box.
Okay. Have you ever faced a significant ethical challenge or a conflict of interest at work, and how did you handle it?
In terms of developers, you always have developers wanting to do things as cheaply as possible, or, there's always rules that they don't always check the grant till after the grant's been given, but you have to, take the challenge that all these things are audited, all these things need to be compliant. So, yes, there's always ways to I like to find ways to make things easier, but I don't like to bend the rules. So whatever the rules are, sometimes it can become very easy by knowing the rules. So I would say there's always people that want a favor, especially if they're a friend of a councilman or a mayor or a developer, or they're creating jobs, but the rules are very strict. And working in government, obviously, you're going to be audited, you're under scrutiny, there's sunshine laws and right to know requests. So I always assume everything I do will be scrutinized. So that's how I operate.
Describe a time when you had to make a very important and difficult decision that affected everyone in your department.
It hasn't happened lately, but sometimes you have to, due to funding cuts, maybe lay someone off or make a challenging personnel change. So there have been times where, you know, you just have to go about that in a professional way and explain the process or the reasons why. And those things are never fun to do, but sometimes funding challenges create funding problems.
So let's say you've been approached with a new idea for your department. Describe how you go about determining the feasibility and possible success of that idea.
Many times people bring ideas to my community and they've been from other places. So I try to look at a historical nature. You know, things that work in Los Angeles may not work in El Paso, or things that work in Philadelphia may work well in Pittsburgh. So I try to take ideas that are brought and see if there's any historical record of them being done successful or well. And sometimes there's new initiatives that you just have to do the research and feasibility on how it's going to work out. And with many loans that we give people or setting up loan programs, I always look at the challenge that people looking for loans are coming to government because a bank said no. So you do have to realize government is there to help more with a different purpose than, say, a bank that's there to make money. But you also want to be smart about it and try and protect your assets as well as, you know, help create jobs.
Describe what you see as your strengths and your areas of development or opportunity related to this position.
I would say, since I understand this is a new position or a position that's been vacant for a while, you would get through me, not where I've hopped around in jobs, but where I've come to work for new mayors or mayors who only had 2 years left on their term. So I did come in, and again, I tried to shape their community. Obviously, if I would be selected for this position, I wouldn't be coming in with a 2-year plan. I would want to stay there a while if I'm going to relocate. So that would be my goal, to try and you know, make a lasting effect on the area and do good work.
How will your work performance enhance the city of Laredo in economic development initiatives as it is today?
I heard the first part. What was the last?
I'll just repeat the whole question for you. How will your...
Ms. Bermudez, I don't think he answered the areas of development part of the last question.
Okay. So, Mr. Robinson, we're going to go back to the previous question where you mentioned your strengths. Can you provide us your areas of development or opportunity?
There's opener up.
Do you need me?
I would say, again, in molding a staff to administer programs, as well as working well with the business community, you can always continue doing that. And when you come into a new area, one of the things I would want to focus on is getting to know what the business's wants are, getting to know the different players within the community so that you don't, so you know the history, because a lot of times there is history to why projects are on the table or why they're not on the table or why you deal with this company and not that company. So I certainly would want to learn as much from meeting with others that know more than me about the area and grow from that.
Okay. So how will your work performance enhance the city of Laredo and economic development initiatives as it is today?
I think it would be similar to my other positions where you're trying to grow the economy, work well with political and business leaders, and I think I could bring that foundation of almost 20 years experience of working in economic development to your town as well.
Okay, so at this point, that concludes the questions that I have for you. I'm going to turn it over to the committee as they have questions that they'd like to ask you as well.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. We will start with Mr. Dominguez this time and go to the left.
Good morning, Mr. Robinson. Arturo Dominguez. I have a trade question. If President Trump would have imposed a 5% tariff to Mexico, how would it affect our city or our nation economically?
If he would what? If he would impose border,
a
you
5%
said?
tariff on goods imported into the United States.
I apologize, I can't hear I don't know if it's the microphone or the
Sorry.
phone connection.
I'll repeat it again. I'm sorry, I had my mic off. If President Trump would have imposed a 5% tariff to Mexico, how would it have affected our city or our nation economically?
Okay. Yeah, I think that certainly would be something that you would have to look at in terms of, is it a temporary tariff or a long-term tariff or something that trickles down to jobs or temporary workers or export-import. I wouldn't know enough about the total effectiveness in your town, but I would think it certainly would be detrimental, but it would also maybe provide for an opportunity to have more of a basis that there won't be swings in either population or prices or workers. So I would think it could be a reactive type reaction to the political things that are going on, but also you'd have to look at what does that mean for prices? Do the prices on goods hurt the USA, or do they hurt workers? So you'd want to look at both and make it not so much a political quest.
Thank you.
I'll kind of follow up on that. Fred Dickey for the record. We're the #1 land port in the United States, and Mexico is our largest trade partner. And that being what it is, do you have any idea what your goal would be to enhance that in our position and to improve our trade coming through the port of Laredo?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, some of the things that are going on nationally are above everybody's pay grade, where we can have thoughts. We can't really address the political things that might be going on. Certainly where you're located, where I'm located, I really have nothing to add because I don't see what you see. You see it more clearly than somebody from Pennsylvania or Maine. So you certainly have a voice in that discussion, but I would think, obviously I'd want to work with the partnerships that have been created separate from the last 2 years or the last 10 years, that there has been, alliances on workers and trade and who buys what, and all those things trickle down to, real numbers because of your location. So obviously I would seize upon your location all the way south from Mexico into Central America even, and use that to your advantage.
Hello, Mr. Robinson. This is Dr. Rodney Rodriguez. How would you work together with other economic development entities in the community to work on a common goal to benefit the city of Laredo?
Where applicable, like I do now, I would attend, if I'm allowed, other organizations' board meetings, get to know their board members and staff, work where we're not competing for grants or funding, but where we could either partner together or where I've always sat, I don't care who takes the credit, as long as it helps Laredo, that's a win. So I would want to communicate with those partners and also, find ways where, we're not stepping on people's toes or duplicating effort or asking a state government to fund the same thing with two different organizations. So I would want to, again, get to know the people as much as possible and have the relationships where we can pick up the phone if there's differences.
Thank you.
Julian Rutnowski for the record. My question is more pertaining towards the fact that the city of Laredo has never had an economic development director. So what would you do with your first 100 days if you were hired by the city of Laredo?
Well, hopefully I'd get on the calendar of everybody on this phone call in my first 10 days and get to know you all and the background of the department or why the department wasn't created before. I'd want to know, as I said, the major employers, decision makers, and then also deal with the federal, state, and local contacts. So I think the first 100 days will be focused on organization, getting to know the people that I'd be working with, and then building those relationships for the next 1,000 days.
Thank you.
Hello, Alma Acevedo. My question is, what is the significance of early childhood education and K through 12 education and the role of economic development?
Again, people moving into your town and businesses locating want to know that the school taxes and the schools are doing well and they're not going to be something that is an inhibitor. So I think, looking at that funding, looking at maybe issues of where there are immigration challenges, you certainly want to find ways that you can not be a deterrent to businesses, especially to businesses maybe even like myself that aren't as familiar with the area initially. You don't want to have a roadblock that would be a negative impact. So funding those programs, funding education, all those are important to enticing businesses to come and stay.
Thank you.
That's all the questions that we have now. What questions do you have for us, Mr. Robinson?
Let me look here. Well, I guess since you're on, a year and a half of this search, is this going to be the end all where you're looking to put somebody in there? And is there a staff and a budget for this position, or what has been the delays in terms of implementing it?
Mr. Robinson, this is Carol Thurkettle for the record. The next set of process for this is they're going to continue interviews for this position and make a recommendation over to management to fill this position as soon as possible. And then the other answer as to the delays, we've had a change in management in the last year and a half. And so that's why the process has taken a little bit of a lengthier process. So that's why we have now a new panel that is now conducting the interviews to fill this position.
Okay, and is there a budget for this position or division? Is it a party of one, or would they have grants to administer, or a staff, or
It is a
would they be?
it is a budgeted position that consists of the department director plus 2 administrative staffs that are currently vacant. So whomever gets this position will need to create the department and hire staff, and also bring in grants to incorporate the development of economic within the city of Laredo.
Okay. Well, that seems fair. What was the budget for the entire department, or did they have that not ironed out yet?
I don't have that number on hand. I know that you can probably look at the budget that was approved for this fiscal year that is located on our website under the budget department, and it might give you a better outlook as to what was budgeted for this department itself.
Okay, and is this position report to the city manager, or the mayor, or the president of council, or how does that work?
This position will report to the city manager or an assistant city manager.
Okay. Well, I would just say if you go to the next level with me, you probably want me to come in and do a face-to-face. So I would certainly be willing to do that if you get to the next level.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. A member of Human Resources will be in contact if you are chosen to move on to the next level, as you said. Are there any final questions you have for us?
No, I think that's it.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Very good. I guess tomorrow we have the face-to-face applicants that are coming in, starting at 12 o'clock. If we can be here like 10 minutes before, just so we can start on time and, you know. Are there any questions by any of the committee members?
Is it gonna be the same setup? Are they gonna be interviewing from where?
They would be interviewing here in the front, yes. And so what we'll do is, we'll bring them in individually during their segments of their interviews that they're scheduled for. They've already been contacted, so they're aware of the time that they need to be here for their interview.
Will we have a taser in case they talk too long?
I'll do my best to keep it on track and focus for you.
Do we have?
I'm sorry.
Are all all 6 individuals, they've been all confirmed as their
Yes.
consent?
Yes,
Well, I guess 3 now at this point. All right.
yeah, yes.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
If we get
Acevedo,
clarification.
Hernandez?
And what I'll do is I'll incorporate the questions that you all asked into the questions for tomorrow, so they'll already be on the actual. Thank you.
I move that we adjourn. Second.
Motion, second.
Do we tally right now, or is it all tomorrow at the same time for
I think
everyone?
after your interviews are done, you all have another special meeting on the 24th, on next Monday. So by then, bring your scores, or if you can tally it before then, that way we can do a spreadsheet, you can discuss it on Monday.
Yeah.
And from there, make that recommendation.
I will not be here Monday. I have a doctor's appointment in San
Yeah,
Antonio.
just, I guess, impose a deadline to submit it over to us so we can compile all your scores together.
Can I
They may
tally
provide
and hand them over
Thursday.
right now, so I don't
Yes.
have to?
Yes,
Okay,
you can.
thank you.
Yes.